in the lead up to the January workshop on the resilience ecosystem. It occurred to us that there is a lot of preparatory thinking that would be good for people to come into that event with already in their minds and with some clarity on where we're coming at this from. And to do some of the initial work, especially the actor mapping, which will be the focus of today's webinar. So thank you all for coming to spend this half an hour. We're going to try and do this as quickly as possible because we have a lot to get through and we want quite a bit of your feedback. Next slide, please. First, a little bit of the logistics. As you know, this workshop is being co-hosted by the 4 organizations whose logos were on the previous slide. And we've been working behind the scenes diligently to try and get all the information together. The location is going to be at the NOAA Science Center in Silver Spring. We've truncated the dates a little bit because we got some feedback that 3 days was going to be hard for everyone to make. So we're now rejiggering the agenda and doing this upfront work of this webinar and the follow-up questions we'll have for you over the next couple of months so that we can make the workshop itself just the 17th and the 18th, so just 2 days. Please make sure that you make your hotel reservations if you're coming in from out of town. The deadline on those is January 2nd. We've gotten a little bit of feedback that something funky was going on with that. We'll make sure that the link is up to date on the workshop support page, which you can see at the bottom. And there's still time if you have other colleagues, especially after we go through the content of today, that you think really should be involved. Let us know, share their names with us, and we can send them an invitation. Also, at the end of this webinar, there's a bunch of questions we're going to ask you about connections with other groups, and we would like to collect more data from everyone on that. So you'll be getting a survey and follow-up in addition to the questions we'll be asking participants on the call today. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so a little bit of clarity on this very busy, not clear slide that I am responsible for. So first off, I want to get some a common understanding of what the resilience ecosystem is. It is a term that a number of us have been using when we talk about everyone who works in the resilience space. It's the organizations and individuals helping the nation understand and prepare for the effects of climate change. Not just preparing for the effects of climate change in relation to natural resources and ecosystems. We are the ecosystem. We are the trophic levels and the creatures in the populations and the creatures in the ecosystem. It is just a metaphor. So here's an array of the folks who have already RSVP'd for this event. You can see that it is broadly inclusive of an array of different sectors that all play a role in making this happen, because we are trying to create an open and inclusive community of climate adaptation professionals who will collaboratively identify and pursue open source and proprietary collaboration for the benefit of all. So I know collaboratively pursue collaborations. That's what happens when you let a whole bunch of people wordsmith together. But the goal really is how do we all work together to support the things that already exist, create the new things that are needed, and make all of this continue to happen in perpetuity, despite the challenges we face. And to that end, we developed a workshop idea with some goals to bring the players in the ecosystem together. Next slide, please. So the Resilience Ecosystem Workshop goals are, first of all, we want a collective understanding of our colleagues and their efforts. Lots of us know about each other. Some of the folks on that previous slide, maybe you've never heard of. We want to make sure that we all understand what each other are doing, so that we can collectively evaluate what ongoing needs and emerging gaps exist, identify potential opportunities for collaboration and shared developmental agendas, develop approaches to sustain core resources, and design solutions to fill the gaps identified in the workshop discussions. This seems like a really important opportunity right now, especially given some of the changes we're seeing in governmental support for some of these issues, but also seeing a lot of the increasing demand by communities and organizations and agencies across the United States. who need support and help, and how do we leverage what we already have and fill the gaps of what needs to be filled, and take advantage of things that are not fully realized, but are already out there. So to that end, may I have the next slide, please? We're going to transition to an overview of an actor mapping exercise that Edward Gardner has been undertaking for the workshop. And I'm going to turn it over to Edward.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your time. We really appreciate that you're taking time now. The bonus and benefit is that you will not have to spend this time at the workshop rehashing the same material. So we have taken some effort to gather your feedback in advance so that we can save time when we're gathered in Silver Spring. And I just want to do a technical check and make sure you can see my screen. If someone could let me know, please.
We see you.
Okay, thank you. So what we've done is, as you know, we've gathered some data from you. When you RSVP'd, we gathered some critical information about who you are, what you do, who you work with, and we're going to share that back now in a novel way in hopes that you'll begin stimulating new ways of thinking about our connections among one another. So on the right side of my screen, you see a diagram with some colorful dots, and those represent the people and organizations that have RSVP'd to our workshop. This network can be reconfigured dynamically based on ideas that you submitted. And so in the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through who's doing what, how our activities are related, and hopefully you will understand that all of this comes from your feedback. And at the end of this conversation, after this conversation, we'll be sending out a follow-up survey to supplement in ways that you think we should supplement this information with updated information. So each color represents something specific. The pinkish, peachish colored dots represent individuals, you. The purple dots represent organizations from higher education institutions. The dark orange represent .coms or for-profit businesses. Green dots are 501c3s and blue dots are federal partners. So if we just focus in on one individual, my colleague Chelsea, who just had a baby, by the way, she works for the NOAA Climate Program Office, a federal entity. But if we go one level out from the Climate Program Office, we can look at her connections to other government entities, as well as higher education and for-profit businesses. And I have to confess, I need to move my doc panel. It's in my way, and it's obscuring my view. So just give me a moment to move it. But if we go one order out from there, we can look at the connections of those connections and see that Chelsea is actually connected to .coms and organizations. And so this framework allows us to analyze individual connections as well as our collective spheres of influence. So I'm sure people are familiar with that phrase, but if you think about your own work you do day to day and perhaps your team focused on a project, you have control in a small sphere, and then you influence the people, say, in your office. And indirectly, you might be influencing people who work with people in your office and so forth, so that your spheres of influence are strongest toward the center and are weakest, but still consequential, further radiating out in these networks. So we want to examine for a moment, using two methods, where and when do we currently interact as a group of people who have RSVP'd already. And I'm going to focus on conferences, and then we're going to look dynamically at which relationships are strongest within this network and which are weakest and which are missing. So we're going to be asking you to give us a little more information about what's missing. So to first look at conferences, here we are looking at a restructuring of this diagram where I've added gray dots for every conference that you said you participate in through your survey. The conferences that are in the middle of this diagram are places where we are already meeting each other, whether it's biannually at the National Adaptation Forum or annually at AGU or AMS. Those are the types of meetings that are in the middle here. And so if we zoom in, for instance, you can see a lot of people, and by far the most common meeting we share is the National Adaptation Forum, which is an obvious consequence of the fact that this whole idea for the resilience ecosystem really was born at the last forum. And if we zoom back out, though, we can think about the meetings where we don't have a lot of common overlap. This is an open ecosystem. So the dots that are on the periphery here represent opportunities for us to be engaged with more publics, more audiences, people who are outside of our direct networks, but who give us insight into very specific aspects. For example, social processes in coastal environments and communities, or the Association of Science and Technology Centers here that we're going to zoom in on in a minute, which one of our members attends, which is a very important vector for providing informal education to a broader public. So if you think about these dots on the periphery, these are connecting nodes to other networks. And hopefully that simulates for you the idea that we have spheres of influence that are beyond where we interact with one another, but in fact are opportunities for us to work with other people. What about our working relationships with one another? I'm going to take the very risky step right now of going online and showing you our network the way it looks today. And what we can do is dynamically change the appearance of this network diagram to give you an understanding of the kind of data that are available from it. Now, as we zoom in, you'll begin to see the names of different organizations. I've stripped out all of the names of individuals so that you can focus instead on the key organizations that you work with. Now, in this diagram, the gray dots represent organizations you said you work with who are not represented in our attendee list. So you may see that and say, well, we really should have representation of someone from the Society for Conservation Biology or the Nature Conservancy. Or you may say, well, looking at this diagram, what really jumps out at me is that the NOAA Climate Program Office is really central to this network. Well, that's obvious because we're one of the main hosts, as is EcoAdapt. An organization that shows up as one of the most connected to organizations is the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. So just with these two networks, just maybe focusing on ASAP for a moment, if we can dynamically build a network that only focuses on them, and then look at the higher order connections of organizations that are connected to them. So at this point, what I'd like to do is invite Laura to pose a question to you and get a little feedback. And I think we just have a couple minutes for that activity, Laura.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have less time than we'd like for things like this. We're interested in knowing, when you see this, what parts of looking at this provide clarity for you about the ecosystem? Are there things that you'd like us to accentuate? Are there things that utterly perplex and confuse you? And feel free to either speak up or to, and I don't know whether we need to unmute everyone or not. I'll leave that in Lauren's hands. Or please use the chat box.
I'm not seeing any chats or hearing any voices. I can carry on, and I'm happy to do so.
There are some asks about whether or not we can zoom into the CPO node. I don't know whether or not that's possible, but you could give it a go and we'll see what happens.
Okay.
We've been having a little bit of technical difficulty doing it live.
So I'm showing you the NOAA Climate Program Office right now, and all of the gray dots represent linkages that someone from the Climate Program Office typed in, but that aren't represented yet in our network. The colored dots all represent actual RSVPs and organizations that the NOAA Climate Program Office works with. These are the direct linkages, and I can extend this to the indirect linkages from the Climate Program Office, as well as second order extended networks. So now you can see how these networks expand with additional levels of complexity and connections added in.
Okay, another comment that we're getting from a number of people is that they think there are missing connections, and that is exactly the heart of the survey we'll be sending after this. We're going to send a list of all of the entities that are on, that have RSVP'd. You'll get a simple poll to fill out to indicate which of those your program, and you'll have to indicate what your program is, are linked to. And then also we're going to, and if you have multiple entities under your program, so like for example for EcoAdapt, I will be answering for both CAKE and the National Adaptation Forum separately, as well as EcoAdapt separately. If there are ones that are not on there that you think are very important that have an RSVP, there'll be an other block for you to fill that in, and you'll be getting that later, hopefully today. So hopefully that answers that question for those folks who've indicated that there are things missing. There are absolutely things missing.
And that's something we know, but rather than us fill it in, we really want to crowdsource it. I think that's about as much time we have for live feedback and interaction, so I'm just going to carry on. In the next section, I'm just going to describe to you some of the higher level ideas that we're bringing into building a process agenda for our facilitated dialogue that we will have in person. And the idea here is that we've done enough work ahead that we can work with professional facilitators to get us thinking very proactively about next steps as a group. So there are two ideas that are going to help you orient to this section. One is that we're using the steps to resilience that the Climate Resilience Toolkit has adopted as a simplified framework for planning and implementing resilience projects. And we've got extending the metaphor of a resilience ecosystem. We're using the idea of trophic levels, where information producers, such as the USGCRP or NOAA scientists, also academics who are part of higher education institutions and organizations that are doing the baseline research that's helping people understand climate impacts, those represent, that's the foundational information that we're all using. The consumers of that information then provide a value-added ingest of that information and then interpret it. Science translators take that level of information and then convey it to someone who is outside of the domain of science, who's in a decision-making role. And ultimately, it's decision makers who are responsible for resources or have responsibility for people or assets who are driving a lot of the interest that there may be out in the community for hiring you in your work. So first, I'm reorganizing our network according to trophic levels. And we'll look first here at the information producers level, which is the basis of our ecosystem. And so we're going to zoom in on one of these nodes here in the middle. And you can see that quite a number of us in our RSVP list already work in this space of developing information, raw information. Also, we can zoom in on the people who are consuming that raw information. It's a smaller list. These are people that are adding value to, but also essentially providing data visualization and access to data and allowing other people to interpret the scientific information that's being produced through assessments and so forth. Moving on up into science translation, this is the emerging field of the boundary between climate science and decision making. And I think notably and not surprisingly, all of us, a vast majority of us are in this space of helping people in society use scientific information. Sort of at the top of the pyramid of the trophic level, you could think about decision makers. And in most discussions that I'm involved in, this is the minority of people. I mean, that's a function of just the way ecosystems are organized, but it also reflects the fact that we are interested in generating more demand for services, and decision makers need to be part of our thinking as we design what we do. So that brings me into the whole notion of adaptation services that we provide as a community. Again, revisiting the steps to resilience, we've asked you to self-identify with which aspect of the steps to resilience you produce content for. And I'm just going to give you a teaser. We can organize your tools, your services according to each of the steps to resilience. And we've done some work ahead so that we can provide facilitated discussions amongst all 5 of these steps to resilience, because we know who self-identifies with doing this work. And that's going to inform how we engage you in real time, in person, to rethink how we work together, maybe even accentuate things we're doing and doing well. Furthermore, we've asked you to tell us about what tools you produce. And we've categorized those into 5 groups that we're also going to use to organize conversations along the lines of what we produce well, what we need to do better, what we're duplicating and replicating amongst each other and causing inefficiencies with, and how can we work better and smarter in the future. So to summarize what we've done up front with this work, we know that we interact directly with one another through meetings in person at the National Adaptation Forum, at annual science meetings, but that we have broader impacts through our individual networks. And I think that's one of our strengths as a community, is that we're reaching diverse audiences. We also know that our adaptation services provide a very broad spectrum of opportunities for clients to engage with us. But there's a lot of overlap in the services we provide, and that is producing functional redundancy. Those of you who've studied ecosystems know that that is a strength as well. We need to build on that, and there'll be more on that in the workshop. Our tools reflect a degree of specialization that has emerged out of client-driven needs, and our consulting services are targeting specific niches, whether it's in natural resources, endangered species, local government, or risk assessment. And that specialization may provide us with opportunities to focus on what we really do well, want to continue to do well, and support each other both with base services and very specific tools. To conclude this summary, to summarize then what we've done as work ahead, we are focusing our process agenda on how to strengthen our mutual interactions through funded projects, and David's going to speak to that in a moment. We know that a services registry and help desk would broaden clients' understanding of what we already provide, and that professional development that targets people in specific business roles would very much benefit the development of new business and commercial opportunities by you in the marketplace. So with that, I'd like to invite David Herring to provide a bit more background about what's next, what's coming, and we'll take it from there. We'll be in touch with you with follow-on activities shortly.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you, Laura. Great job. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So as Laura mentioned, the workshop will be held in Silver Spring, just adjacent to our Building 4 in the NOAA building complex, which is just adjacent to the Silver Spring stop on the Red Line in the DC Metro. So it's conveniently located near the Metro and near nearby hotels. And there's the address. As Laura noted, we are dropping back from a 3-day to a 2-day workshop to accommodate your interests. And so much of what Edward was sharing is an effort to allow us to really hit the ground running and save time where we can. So there are some of the logistical details, again, that you can make note of. And this detail can be also shared with you in a follow-up, as well as a follow-up questionnaire that we're going to be gathering some more information from you. So again, thank you for the level of engagement that you've shared so far. Next slide. So, you know, if you're still wondering why should I attend, maybe you're on the fence, or maybe you're wondering if you should encourage certain colleagues to be there. There are many potential benefits, but in particular, one is in the course of the workshop, you're going to be interacting with peers and colleagues in the different entities and organizations that Edward was just showing you in the mapping. And we're going to be identifying opportunities where we can synergize our efforts, particularly looking for sweet spots where collaboration has mutual benefits and where there can be new wholes greater than sum of individual parts. And so there are going to be seed funds made available so that through the course of your workshop, you may convene with others to think of ideas that you want to pursue or pilot projects that you want to pitch, for which you can get some seed funding. We'll share more details about that in the workshop, but in short, the idea is to be able to build on or snap together one another's work, one another's efforts or tools in ways that are help us to be able to scale up or scale down as needed in helping the nation build resilience. Certainly getting a clear sense of our purpose in the big picture. If some of you are working in federal agencies or in nonprofits and you have to manage an annual budget and think about your allocation of resources from year to year, knowing who you work with and where you are strategically within the ecosystem and how you can make most efficient use of your own resources collectively together with others can be very helpful. I know it would be very helpful to me. And if there are things I need to focus on or things I should ramp down my focus on, I'm intending to use the workshop for that purpose to help me in my strategic allocation of resources, and others may benefit from that as well. And certainly the opportunity to learn, to network, to share best practices, and to have access to others' expertise and resources. Next slide. Yeah, and so if we have piqued your interest to learn more, if you find you still have more questions, certainly with respect to logistics or registration or conference and workshop details, reach on out to Lauren Lynch. Her address is given there. She's with EcoAdapt, and that's her email address rather. And overall, if you have other questions about the workshop agenda, or you want to know any more about the workshop itself, or you have ideas or thoughts or recommendations, certainly be interested in hearing those. We have a planning committee, and I would be happy to receive your feedback at my email address, and I'll certainly be sharing it with the whole committee. And I hope by now you too have gotten the message that much of what we're doing is very much in response to what you're telling us and what we're learning from you already. And so this is very much a user-driven, interactive and highly engaging experience that we're working on designing for you and for us all. So with that, I'll open it up back to Laura and Edward, or anyone if there are other questions or comments.
Are there any questions? Thank you all for the comments that were inserted via the question section of the GoToWebinar. That is very helpful. Please feel free to contact Lauren or David or me, Laura at ecoadapt.org, if you have any questions or follow-up. There were a couple of questions that required follow-up in the question section. We'll be following up with those. And you will also be getting the poll that we mentioned to help fill out those connections. We are in complete agreement that there are missing connections, and we want to make sure that that's built out more clearly. But please make sure that you're not just listing informal connections. We really just want to track the formal linked connections between tangible resources. I think that will be the most useful. Obviously, we know we're a fairly small community. We mostly know each other, but we want to map it out quite explicitly in terms of how resources may be shared.
If I could just tag on to that, Laura, we are using your responses to build out the map. So we did not make any attempt to go and research connections between organizations. So this is entirely driven from the bottom up, and we're looking forward to continuing to evolve the ideas based on where you'd like to see us go. And we are continuing to refine our process agenda, working with professional facilitators based on what you're telling us is important. So this feedback is really critical.
Yep, and I see Kara made a really good question, posed a really good question. I'll just really quickly address it. She says, what if you have a project in development already? What's the best way to leverage the workshop to advance an early stage effort? And those ideas would certainly be welcome. We have ideas that we've already gathered and are putting on the table, but we're also allowing room for additional ideas, recognizing that they will bubble up or that things are already in play. And I think we'll be figuring out together what's the best way to leverage the workshop to advance ongoing efforts. But we certainly do want to hear about them and know about them. And there will be opportunity to share them in the workshop.
Okay, with that, we are at time and we want to be respectful of that. Please continue to have dialogue with us, but most importantly, we look forward to having in-depth dialogue with everyone in the January meeting, where we can hopefully move this ecosystem forward and strengthen its ability to continue to deliver what needs to be delivered in the years to come. Thank you so much.